Guys, do not forget to subscribe for the latest in boxing and raw boxing opinions. So I'm going to quote Anthony Joshua. We're going to fight regardless because we're in the same weight category and we're in the same era. And it's the fight that people want to see. Yeah, we're going to fight each other. But it's interesting because let's say worse happens with Povetkin. It don't stop me from having to fight them. They will still want to fight me because we're big in the game. That fight will happen regardless who wins. If Wilder gets beat in that fight with Fury, I'll still fight Wilder down the line. Or if Fury gets beat. With boxing, one corner loses, one corner wins. But because it's still a fight that the public will demand, big puncher, good stylistic fighter, good talkers, there will always be interest around the name of the heavyweight boxing. So that is what unified heavyweight champion of the world Anthony Joshua had to say. He says some interesting things. He says that whatever happens in his career, throughout his career or Wilder's career, he still wants to fight Wilder. So if he loses basically to Alexander Povetkin in his next fight, he still wants to fight Wilder at some point. Or if he sees Wilder himself lose to Fury or some other guy down the line, he will still want to face him because, as he says, they're both in the same era right now. Wilder and Anthony Joshua both are in the same era, and this is a fight that the public want to see, which is true. It's kind of like Evander Holyfield and Mike Tyson. Back in the late 80s, early 90s, people wanted to see Evander Holyfield versus Mike Tyson, right? I remember doing a lot of research on this. When Evander Holyfield moved up in weight, he was the unified champion at cruiserweight. He moved up to heavyweight, and he started fighting heavyweights, and he wanted to fight Mike Tyson, who at the time was the undisputed heavyweight, and people wanted to see that. People wanted to see Mike Tyson versus Evander Holyfield. Of course, what happens? Mike Tyson ends up losing, right? He loses to Buster Douglas in a shocking upset. What happens then? Mike Tyson, his career, he ends up going to prison for, rape allegations and stuff. What happens then? Evander Holyfield was supposed to fight Mike Tyson, but because Mike Tyson lost to Buster Douglas, instead Evander Holyfield fought Buster Douglas for the undisputed heavyweight championship of the world, and he knocks out Buster Douglas with an uppercut. He then becomes the undisputed heavyweight champion of the world. When he becomes the undisputed heavyweight champion of the world, obviously they want him to face Mike Tyson, but what happens? Mike Tyson, like I said, ends up going to jail. And that fight can't happen. Of course, years pass, and in those years, Evander Holyfield loses to guys like Riddick Bowe. He ends up having a trilogy with guys like Riddick Bowe. Mike Tyson comes back. He beats Frank Bruno. He becomes heavyweight champion of the world. At this point, the championships are basically scattered all over the place. But Mike Tyson comes back in '95. He wins the title, I believe, against Frank Bruno or somebody named Selden. I forgot his first name, but Selden something. Then he beats Frank Bruno. Then he fights Evander Holyfield to unify with him. And at this point, mind you, by the time they fought in '96, people wanted to see them fight 6 years earlier, right? Back in 1990, when they were both undefeated. But obviously, by the time they fought, Mike Tyson had already lost once. Evander Holyfield had lost like twice. But look at how big that fight was. That was still a massive fight, and it ended up being a big, entertaining fight. People thought that Mike Tyson was going to beat Evander Holyfield and become undisputed and the number one heavyweight like he was in the 1980s, but it didn't happen. Holyfield upset Mike Tyson, and that was it. That was all she wrote. And then, of course, they had the next fight, the infamous ear fight, where he, bites a chunk of Holyfield's ear off. Then that was it. The point was, boxing fans still paid to see that fight. They were still happy to see that fight because they wanted to see that fight back in the early 90s. It didn't happen when they were both undefeated, when they were basically at the peak of their careers, but it still happened and people still saw it. Just like Manny Pacquiao versus Floyd Mayweather Jr. Manny Pacquiao versus Floyd Mayweather Jr. People wanted to see that fight back in 2009, 2010. But, when they were at their best, back in 2009, Manny Pacquiao was considered the pound-for-pound king. He was considered the number one best fighter because at the time, Mayweather had retired. And Manny Pacquiao had won several, he had won titles in several weight divisions. So he was considered the pound-for-pound king. And then Mayweather came back. And then everyone was saying, let's have the two pound-for-pound kings fight each other, Mayweather versus Pacquiao. And they wanted to see that fight back in 2009, 2010. What happened? The fight didn't happen. It didn't materialize for several years. And what happened? By the time they fought in 2015, what happened? Manny Pacquiao had lost several. He had lost. He got knocked out cold against Marquez. He lost some fights, and Floyd Mayweather had looked bad against Marcos Maidana. They were. By the time they fought, they weren't young fighters. They were like, Mayweather was like 38, and Pacquiao was like 37. So they were already past their prime fighters. Let's say they would have fight back in 2009 when they first wanted to see this fight. Mayweather would have only been like 32. Pacquiao would have been like 30 years old, and Pacquiao was at his best at the time. So that would have been a way. I'm pretty sure they would have sold even more tickets because people wanted to see it back then a lot. But I think the fight kind of died down by the time they fought in 2015 because they were much older and Pacquiao had a few losses in his record since then. He accumulated a few losses since then, but the fight still generated interest, right? So that's what Anthony Joshua was saying. Even if Deontay Wilder loses down the line, he thinks that it will still generate interest and he'll still fight him. And I agree. I think people will still want to see Deontay Wilder versus Tyson Fury, even if Deontay Wilder versus Anthony Joshua, even if Deontay Wilder loses. Of course, I'm pretty sure boxing fans would, like, if someone's going to beat Wilder, I'm pretty sure Anthony Joshua fans would want it to be Anthony Joshua, right? They would want it. Like, they would want Anthony Joshua to fight Deontay Wilder when Deontay Wilder's undefeated, and then he beats him. Because then they could give him all the credit and be like, he was the first guy to beat Wilder. I'm pretty sure Wilder fans feel the same way. I'm pretty sure Wilder fans want Deontay Wilder to face Anthony Joshua when he is undefeated. So then if he beats him, people could say, Wilder fans could say, he beat Anthony Joshua. He was the first guy to beat Anthony Joshua. He was the first guy to give Anthony Joshua that L in his record, right? Because let's be real, a lot of times when fighters lose, then if they lose again, a lot of times people don't, they don't like giving the fighter credit. They say stuff like, the reason he won is because he wasn't the same. He was damaged goods when he fought this dude. A lot of that happens a lot. I see this all the time where a fighter, he wins a good fight, but then people don't give him credit. They say stuff like he's damaged goods, and I don't think that's right. I'm not a boxing fan who does that. I think if the only time I'll say something like that is if the guy is like completely shot. Like if it's like obvious that he's not the same, then yeah, I'll make a video saying stuff like, oh, he fought a shot dude. Like, Bermane Stiverne was shot when he fought Deontay Wilder. That's why I said that was a bum fight, title defense. Also, Chris Arreola, he was shot when he fought Deontay Wilder. But that's why I'll say stuff like that. But let's say a guy is young and he just has one loss, and then he loses to another guy. I'll still give him credit because, I could tell that he still has, things in the tank and stuff. He's not like shot to bits or anything. You know what I'm saying? So, again, I like the fact that Anthony Joshua would still want to fight Wilder because, I remember, even if he loses, because I remember when they asked Wilder, Anthony Joshua says that his team will still want to fight me if I lose because I'm a big name, which it's true. He'll still be a big name if he loses, but I'm not sure I think they will still want to fight him because I remember months ago, I saw an interview where they asked Wilder, if Anthony Joshua loses, would you still fight him? And Wilder said, no, I wouldn't fight him because why would I fight him? He lost. And I remember Wilder said this years ago when it came to Fury. I remember they asked Deontay Wilder, this was before he was even a champion, if Tyson Fury were to lose, because back then, I think this was 2004, 2015, because I remember back then, 2014, because I remember back then they were talking about the Wilder versus Fury back then. And I remember they asked Wilder, if Fury were to lose right now, would you still fight him? And he said no, I wouldn't fight him because why? He lost. I'm not gonna fight him. Why would I lose? Why would I fight a guy that has lost? So Wilder's one of those type of fighters that if he sees a guy loses, he's not gonna fight him. So if Anthony Joshua were to lose before they fight, you would probably see Wilder going around saying, I'm not gonna fight Anthony Joshua. He lost. What's the point of me fighting him? But Anthony Joshua doesn't think this way. He believes that the boxing fans would still want to see him fight Wilder, which is true. I personally, as a boxing fan, would still want to see that fight. Even if Joshua loses or Wilder loses, I would still want to see that fight, just because if they never fight, you'll have Wilder fanboys and Joshua fans always saying that Wilder would have beat, you would have Wilder fans saying Wilder would have beaten Joshua. But, Joshua ducked him forever. Or Joshua fans will be saying Joshua would have beaten him. So how do you, shut this whole crap out, these doubts, or this guy would have done this guy would have done that? You shut that up by fighting each other, and not fighting each other late. Like, for example, Mike Tyson versus Lennox Lewis. Mike Tyson fought Lennox Lewis, but he didn't fight the best version of Tyson. Like, he fought Tyson when he was really shot, when he was really at the end of his career. I would have loved it if Lennox Lewis and Mike Tyson would have fought in like 1996. For example, I give Evander Holyfield more credit on beating Mike Tyson than I give Lennox Lewis, because Evander Holyfield fought a much more better version of Mike Tyson, right? When Evander Holyfield fought Mike Tyson, he was coming off the layoff, but he was looking good in his comeback fights, right? He was looking good. And he was like 31 years old at the time. He was looking still fresh. He still wasn't as the way he was maybe in 1988, but he was still much better than he was by the time he fought Lennox Lewis. So I gave Evander Holyfield more credit for beating that version of Tyson. By the time Tyson fought Lennox Lewis, I know that Lennox Lewis was older than Mike Tyson, but just because a fighter's older than him doesn't mean that that guy can't be shot. That by the time Mike Tyson aged a lot quicker than Lennox Lewis when it came to his style, because he was an aggressive style, and that style doesn't last long in boxing, while Lennox Lewis was more of a technician. By the time he fought Lennox Lewis, Mike Tyson at that point was, I believe, a shot fighter, right? He looked horrible when he fought Francis Botha. I thought he looked shot at that point. He was looking shot by the early 2000s. And then a year and a half after he loses to Lennox Lewis, he loses to Danny Williams. And then he loses to Kevin McBride. That's how shot he was. So no one's going to tell me he was at his best when he fought Lennox Lewis. He wasn't. It's kind of like Bernard Hopkins and Roy Jones Jr. Bernard Hopkins is older than Roy Jones Jr. But Roy Jones Jr. became shot way quicker than Bernard Hopkins. If you remember, Bernard Hopkins and Roy Jones Jr. fought each other when they were young, back in 1993, the first time. Back then, Roy Jones Jr. was in the prime of his life, and he was just too fast. His reflexes were too sharp. Bernard Hopkins was the technician. And based off athleticism, he was able to beat and outbox, and because he was just too fast for Bernard Hopkins. They fought again 17 years later in the year 2010. By the time they fought, Roy Jones, mind you, Bernard Hopkins was older than Roy Jones Jr. He was older by like 4 years. But by the time they fought, Roy Jones was shot to bits. By the time he fought, Roy Jones was a shot fighter in the year 2005. Like when he fought, what's his name? Johnson. I always forget his first name. I know Glenn, yes. When he fought Glenn Johnson in 2005, he looked completely shot. I honestly believe when Antonio Tarver knocked out Roy Jones Jr. in 2004, he literally destroyed Roy Jones Jr.'s career. Like, that was it. Roy Jones Jr., people say that when he moved down from heavyweight, because he fought John Ruiz in 2003, then he moved down, he lost 25 pounds to go back to 175 to defend his, unified belts against Antonio Tarver, and he looked bad in that fight, and people were blaming it at the fact that he had to lose all that weight, so he basically lost strength. But we have to keep in mind that at that point, Roy Jones Jr. was already like 35 years old. So I think both of those things played a factor. I think not only the fact that he had to lose weight, but I also think the fact that his age, Roy Jones Jr. was a guy who depended on his reflexes. And unfortunately, in boxing, reflexes only last when you're young. Every fighter you see it. Look at every fighter. Look at them when they were young. Look at how fast they were, especially with their reflexes, with the ability to like move out of the way of punches. Leap out of the way. Roy Jones Jr. used to literally leap out. He was so quick. By the time he lost and got knocked out to against Antonio Tarver, he was 35. So that was the time where your reflexes start, betraying you, and you start basically slowing down. And once he lost to Antonio Tarver, after that he basically became a shadow of himself, right? He ended up, I thought he looked shot to bits when he I think 2 fights later he fights Glenn Johnson and he gets beat up by Glenn Johnson. Like, that was not competitive fight. He got beat up by Glenn Johnson before he got knocked out against him, and he looked like a mummy when he got knocked out against Glenn Johnson. He was like zombified, right? He looked like he had just been shot in at close range. He looked shot to bits. And by the time he fought obviously Joe Calzaghe, he got beat up by Joe Calzaghe. He fought guys like my God, he got destroyed by Danny Green. What's his name? That cruiserweight. Then he moves up to cruiserweight. I don't know what the hell This is a guy who turned pro at middleweight. He should never be fighting at cruiserweight, but he moves up at cruiserweight at the end of his career, and he fights what's that guy's name? I already forgot. The dude who married, the long reigning champion at cruiserweight. I already forgot his name. Denis Lebiev, and he gets knocked out cold because first of all he was too shot to fight Lennox Lebiev, and he wasn't at cruiserweight. This guy who was at Roy Jones was at his best at middleweight / super middleweight, not at no cruiserweight. He was too small for that division. But by the time he fought Bernard Hopkins, he was shot to bits, right? And he was younger than Bernard Hopkins, but look at but he was still shot to bits, wasn't he? Look at the difference. Look at Bernard Hopkins. Bernard Hopkins, when he fought Roy Jones, he was in a good place in his career, right? I think he had just he had a close fight with Joe Calzaghe. He had beaten Kelly Pavlik, and this was after he beat Roy Jones. He went on to beat a prime. Oh God, I already forgot his name. The guy who beat Lucien Bute. Oh, Jean Pascal. He beat a Jean Pascal when he was young, when Jean Pascal was in his prime. Right after Jean Pascal beat Chad Dawson, I believe they fought twice. He had a draw with him, and then he beat him. But that's how much better off Bernard Hopkins was at that stage in his career than Roy Jones Jr. Roy Jones was shot to bits by the time they fought in the rematch. Again, B-Hop was older, but he was in a better, just because you're younger than a guy doesn't mean you can't be shot. And that's basically, I know I went on a long ass rant here, or not rant, but a long ass dialogue, but it's because sometimes I get into these things, I'm sorry about that. But that's basically what it was with Lennox Lewis and Mike Tyson. Lennox Lewis was older than Mike Tyson, but Mike Tyson had become shot way quicker than Lennox Lewis. Like, Mike Tyson was shot. Just look at the difference. Lennox Lewis went on to have a competitive fight with guys like, Vitaly Klitschko, a young Vitaly Klitschko, while Mike Tyson went on to get beat up by guys like Danny Williams and Kevin McBride, 2 low-level guys. So it just goes to show you how shot Mike Tyson was at that point. But again, that's what I'm saying. I just hope that doesn't happen. I hope, if Anthony Joshua fights Deontay Wilder, they don't wait and say they fight after a couple of losses. I just hope they fight sooner than later. I hope they don't wait 10 years by the time they're completely shot, both of them. Like I said, I wish Lennox Lewis would have fought Mike Tyson in 96, 95, when I would have given him way more credit back then. Like I said, I gave Holyfield more credit than Lennox Lewis because I thought he fought a better version of Mike. But again, That's all I'm saying. When it comes to Wilder, I don't know, because Joshua's saying he would do it. He'll fight Wilder still. He'll fight Wilder still. But Wilder, I saw him say, like I said in an interview in the past, if Joshua loses, I ain't fighting him again. So, hopefully that's not the case. I don't want these guys to go out throughout their careers never fighting each other, because they should fight. They're in the same era. Riddick Bowe and Lennox Lewis were in the same era. They should have fought, but Riddick Bowe ducked him. That's why they never fought. I don't want that to be the case with Anthony Joshua and Wilder. They should fight. They're in the same era. The only way they're not going to fight is if Wilder does what Riddick Bowe did and throws his WBC belt in the trash, or if Anthony Joshua ends up losing and Wilder goes around saying, I'm not going to fight him now. So yeah, I really hope that these guys end up fighting one day. And because that boxing needs these guys to fight. And like I said, I hope they don't prolong it. I hope they don't do what Mayweather versus Pacquiao did, or Bernard Hopkins versus Roy Jones Jr. the rematch did. I hope they don't wait several years when they're both at the ends of their careers, when they're both shot to bits. They need to fight now while they're young, while they're in their best. Even if they lose, at least fight while they're still young. Because if you fight each other when you're shot to bits, ain't nobody gonna give you credit, and that loses a lot of interest. The best time to fight is when they're both young in their prime, because that's when everybody wants to see it. And that's when you get the most credit. Whoever wins gets the most credit, because because we look at it like, okay, you beat him while he was in his prime. So that's why that's the best time to fight each other, is when, at least to get the most credit out of it. It's right now while they're young. That's all I'm saying. The latest they should fight each other is 2020. I don't want to see these guys fighting each other by 2022, 2023, because by then Wilder will be like 38. Like he already be on that in that age where he's up there, and people. And then if Anthony Joshua beats him, they'll say Wilder was past his prime. That's what I'm saying. The latest they should fight each other is 2020. Anywhere between now, 2018 to 2020. That's it. Anyway, guys, that's all I have to say. Thanks for watching. Hit that subscribe button, hit that like button, and subscribe.